Okay, two sides to every question. Well, here's a good one. Was Napoleon good for France? Well, certainly one of the most famous characters in history, accomplished a great deal, certainly caused a lot of havoc. So, understandably, there are people on both sides of this question. So, just a brief recap. Napoleon was born in Corsica. It had only recently become part of France. It had actually been part of Italy before that. So his family was ethnically Italian, actually. But in any case, Napoleon himself, as a young man, joined the army. He clearly was really good at what he did. He started getting promoted, became a general, became the first consul in just after the turn of the century, after having engineered a coup in 1799, and finally got himself crowned emperor in 1804. Oh dear, a bit of a bit of a problem there, isn't it? And well, went on to wage a very successful military campaign, many battles, leading up, of course, to the disastrous invasion of Russia when he lost virtually all of the Grande Armée. That led to his defeat at the big Battle of Leipzig and eventually to his exile. His return, of course, then to confront Wellington at Waterloo, and he lost that one. Eventually went off to his final exile, died at age 51 at a remote island, St. Helena, and is now buried at Invalides, the building that was originally built as a veterans hospital in Paris, and it contained a royal chapel, which Louis XIV used for his religious functions. And he was finally buried there in 1861. So that was 40 years after he died. And for many, he is revered, perhaps even worshipped. So what's going on here? So what are the arguments that we have? What are the arguments for? Well, Napoleon was good for France. Okay, let's start with those. Well, to begin with, and perhaps in some people's eyes, one of the really most important things, he brought some order to France. The revolution and the terror, so forth, had caused chaos and anarchy in France. Nobody knew what was going on, and Napoleon was the chap to kind of bring order to the whole thing, and he did really sort it out. And so just for that, we have to give him a lot of credit. Number two, he was in many respects a creature of the Enlightenment. He realized that laws were inequitable. He devised the Napoleonic Code, which is still in effect in France. It's a code which rests on three pretty impressive principles. One is clarity, so everybody knows what the law is. That's really not too unreasonable a requirement. Second, secularism, that was keep the church out of it. And number three, the right to own property, getting away from a kind of a feudal system of fealty to the real landowner and so forth. So that's a pretty impressive strength and accomplishment right there. I've read that Napoleon himself viewed the Napoleonic Code as perhaps his greatest legacy. Next, he presided over the end of absolutist monarchy, even though there were a couple of resurgent efforts to restore the monarchy after his exile and death. Nonetheless, they didn't come to anything, and the monarchy was finished in France. And of course, the ending of the power and existence of an absolutist monarchy was the principal thing which caused so much opposition to him from just about every other country in Europe where there was an absolutist monarch. So, therefore, his principles were in part of his undoing. He was also in favor of freedom of religion, freedom of worship. He saw the Jews as a force for strength and accomplishment, and was against the whole ghettoization and discrimination against Jews. He simply saw I suppose, the Catholic Church as being an unworthy steward of the morality of the people because of its kind of self-serving behavior. And in fact, he got into several disputes with the papacy, and at one point captured the Pope, Pius VI, I think it was, and brought him to Paris as a prisoner. So he stood up for the notion of not only freedom of religion, but freedom of oppression from religion and from the church. And perhaps finally, he was one of the greatest generals ever. In many respects, he devised and improved upon and almost created the rules of modern warfare. He was a strategist and a tactician who dedicated himself to doing it right, to anticipating every move of the enemy and so forth. He apparently had 57 pitched battles, won 50 and only lost 7. It's a pretty good record, certainly for a sports team. It's wonderful. For a warrior, it's pretty good as well. And Wellington actually referred to his charisma and the effect he had on the morale of his troops, and said Napoleon in the battlefield is worth 40,000 troops. Wow. What a compliment that is from the man who beat him. Wow, there's a pretty impressive list of accomplishments right there. Okay, so what are some of the arguments against Napoleon? Why should we not consider him to have been good for France? Well, I guess to begin with, there was a certain element of narcissistic megalomania in his declaring himself to be the emperor, particularly when his platform and utterances had been anti-monarchist and stood for the end of the monarchy, and there he was making himself a monarch. So he got carried away, I guess, in that respect, and lived in a certain amount of luxury as well. If you've ever seen any of those paintings, particularly of his coronation by David and others, they were grotesquely elaborate. Well, next, another reason why he wasn't so great was that he, despite being a fine general, greatly overstepped himself in the famous advance into Russia in 1812. He was doing okay for a while, but the scorched earth policy of the Russians finally defeated him in the Grande Armée. On his way back, they were beset by attacks from the flanks and from the rear, by typhus, by the sheer horror of the Russian winter, desertions. The army had a lot of problems, and by the time it got back to France, there was almost nothing left of it. And as a consequence, it was greatly weakened when it then confronted the coalition of his enemies at the Great Battle of Leipzig in 1813. That battle apparently was the largest battle in the terms of the number of combatants of any battle ever in Europe up until that time. And that battle, his loss from that battle eventually led to his final exile, the first exile to Elba. Okay, he may have been a great general, but he went too far. Some of the Roman emperors recognized this. Hadrian decided, let's not try to expand any further. We really can't manage it. Napoleon should have read about Hadrian, I think. And finally, he left France in tumult once again, ironically, because he had rescued it from tumult, and in dire financial straits. As a result of some of the financial pressures, he wound up selling the Louisiana Territory in America and to the Americans, and it was about almost a third of what is now the continental United States. So a huge chunk of real estate. Had that not happened, France would have continued to be a major player in the Western Hemisphere, in America. Perhaps the Civil War and slavery might not have happened. There might have been a divide of a different sort between the French and the British. Who knows? American history could have been dramatically different, and perhaps France would have been better off as a result of that. We don't know. There's so many what ifs with something like this, but the Louisiana Purchase was just a major turning point in both American and in French history. Well, there's a lot of negatives there. I must say the biggest problem, of course, was overreaching himself in Russia, but there were others as well. So, as a result of all that, what's my take on it? Well, I guess my take is that he was a brilliant Enlightenment butcher. He started a lot of wars and battles and had huge numbers of people killed, for which he must be accountable. But he had huge beneficial effects as well. So, from the standpoint of France, France was in tumult after he left. Took a long time for the country to recover from the effects of Napoleon, but recover they did, and with many Enlightenment improvements. The eventual demise of the absolute monarchy, the creation of the Napoleonic Code, civil order, and so forth. So, as they sometimes say, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. So I guess I'd have to vote in balance. He was good for France. Okay. Well, hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, as usual, give me a like, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and comment if you will. Make any suggestions for further videos of this sort, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.